The hiss of the pressure cuff was the only steady rhythm in the chaos. Alara ignored the shouting, the panic of the new resident, the metallic scent of blood that clung to the air like a shroud. Her focus was singular, narrowed to the man on the gurney. His breathing was shallow, a ragged flag of surrender. A dark suit, exquisitely tailored, was ruined by an even darker stain blooming across the abdomen. Gunshot. She worked with practiced economy, her hands moving before her mind gave the full command. For line in, pressure dressing applied, vitals called out in a clear, calm voice that cut through the noise. The men who brought him in stood against the wall like statues carved from granite and shadow, their stillness a far greater threat than any shouting. Her job was to save a life. She did not care whose it was. That was the rule she lived by. Dr. Albright, the senior attending, finally pushed his way through the curtain, his face pale and sweating. He took one look at the patient, at the silent sentinels by the wall, and his professionalism fractured. "Report this. Now," she told the resident, not taking her eyes off the monitor. It was protocol. Gunshot wounds were an immediate police matter. "Hold that call," Albright snapped, his voice tight. He grabbed her arm. "We stabilize him first." Quietly, Alara looked from his terrified eyes to the man on the gurney, whose own eyes had fluttered open. They were the color of storm clouds over a winter ocean, intelligent and shockingly aware despite the trauma. He was watching her, assessing her. But the world she thought she was in, a world of protocols and saving lives, was not the world she was in at all. She was in his world now, and she was about to learn she could not leave. The next morning, her locker was cleared out, and a termination letter waited for her on the head nurse's desk. Insubordination, arguing with a senior physician. The words were sterile, corporate nonsense. The truth was written in the ghost of a patient who was never officially admitted and the lingering fear in Dr. Albright's eyes. She had saved the wrong man. Or rather, she had saved him the right way, and in doing so, had become a loose thread in a tapestry she was never meant to see. That evening found her at the bottom of a glass of whiskey that cost more than her last 3 meals combined. The bar was on the top floor of a hotel she had no business being in, all dark wood, low light, and the quiet murmur of people whose problems were abstract. She was nursing the amber liquid, the burn in her throat a welcome distraction from the hollow ache in her chest. Her career, the only thing she had ever truly built for herself, was gone. Vanished in the space of one heartbeat on a monitor and one order she had tried to follow. A low whine broke through her haze. She looked down. A dog, massive and black as polished jet, stood beside her stool. It was a cane corso, its head the size of a small boulder, its cropped ears alert. A thick leather collar studded with silver adorned its powerful neck. The dog nudged her hand with its wet nose, its tail giving a single, hopeful thump against the leg of the stool. It looked at her with eyes that were ancient and knowing. Alara's first thought was that security had been shockingly lax. Her second was that it was the most beautiful animal she had ever seen. She reached out, her fingers sinking into the thick, short fur of its neck. "Hey there, big guy," she murmured. "Are you lost?" "He is not." The voice was quiet. A gravelly baritone that vibrated with coiled power came from behind her. Alara turned slowly. The man from the emergency room stood there. Dante Moretti. She did not know his name then, only the memory of his face, pale with blood loss, and the unnerving intensity of his gaze. Now he was whole. He wore a dark gray suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. There was no sign of the wound that had nearly killed him, but the stillness around him was the same. It was the stillness of a predator. He was not looking at her. He was staring at his dog, which had just laid its heavy head possessively in Alara's lap, a deep rumble of contentment rising from its chest. Dante's expression was unreadable, a mask of cold control, but his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, narrowed with a dangerous curiosity. "What did you say to my dog?" he asked. His voice was not accusatory. It was a demand for data. Alara froze. She had not said anything. Not in English, anyway. When the dog had first approached, a phrase from a long-forgotten summer had surfaced, a ghost on her tongue. It was a memory of her grandmother, an art historian who had dragged her to a tiny, forgotten village in the Italian countryside to study its dying dialect. A dialect spoken by only a few hundred people. "Stai buono, anima bella," she had whispered to the dog, her voice barely audible. "Be still, beautiful soul." The dog sighed, nestling deeper. Dante's gaze snapped to her face. The mask cracked, revealing a flicker of something she could not name. It was not surprise. It was calculation. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, the quiet in his voice more menacing than any shout. "My grandmother," she said, her own voice tight. She was a linguist. He did not believe her. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened. No one, absolutely no one outside of the stone walls of his family's ancestral home, knew that dialect. It was the language of his grandfather, the language his older brother, Leo, had used to train this very dog. Nero responded to nothing else. "You were the nurse," he stated, not a question. "The one Albright fired." Alara's blood ran cold. He knew. Of course, he knew. "I was just doing my job." "You were," he agreed, his eyes sweeping over her, taking in the faint tremor in her hands, the defiant set of her jaw. "And now you don't have one. You are also a witness. The men who came for me are not the sort to leave loose ends." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the space between them. "My car is downstairs. You are coming with me." It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. Her life as a nurse was over. Her life as Alara Vance, an ordinary woman from Brooklyn, was over. She was now a problem on Dante Moretti's ledger, and he was a man who balanced his books. The penthouse was less a home and more a fortress disguised by breathtaking views of the city. Glass walls looked out over a sprawling metropolis that suddenly felt like a cage. The furniture was minimalist, expensive, and cold. There were no photographs, no personal touches, only space and silence and the omnipresent weight of Dante's authority. He left her in the cavernous living room with a glass of water she did not touch and the silent company of the dog, Nero. The animal stayed by her side, a warm, solid presence in the sterile environment. Dante returned with another man, older, with a face like a roadmap of old fights. His name was Marco. They spoke in low tones, but the words were sharp, lethal. Betrayal, Falcone, territory. Alara understood then. This was not just a man who had been shot. This was a king whose throne had been challenged. She was a pawn in a war she did not understand. Later that night, Dante found her by the glass wall, staring down at the river of headlights below. Nero was asleep at her feet. "My brother, Leo, gave me that dog," he said without preamble, his voice coming from the shadows behind her. "He was killed 6 months ago. An ambush. Someone on the inside sold him to Silvio Falcone." Alara said nothing. There were no words for that kind of wound. Leo was the only other person Nero would listen to like that. Dante continued, his voice devoid of emotion, a simple reporting of facts. "He trained him using the dialect of our village. He said it was a language for secrets, for family." He finally stepped into the light, his gaze pinning her to the spot. "So I ask you again, who are you?" "I told you," she said, her voice steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. "My grandmother studied the dialect. I spent a summer with her there when I was 19. I picked some of it up." "A summer," he repeated, skeptical. "And you remember it well enough to soothe a grieving animal?" "I remember what matters," she replied, meeting his gaze. He studied her for a long moment, his mind clearly working, turning her over like a puzzle piece that did not fit. She was a nurse from Brooklyn. She should be nothing. But the dog, his dead brother's dog, had chosen her. In his world, such things were not coincidence. They were signs. A piercing alarm suddenly blared through the penthouse. A shrill, insistent scream accompanied by flashing red lights. Alara jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. Fire. Dante did not move. He watched her. His men, appearing from nowhere, moved with calm efficiency, speaking into their wrists. But two of them, flanking the hallway, did not seem to be following orders. They were watching Dante, their hands straying toward the jackets of their suits. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken challenge. This was her chance. In the confusion, she could make it to the service stairs. She could run, disappear into the city below, and pray he never found her. Her body tensed, ready to bolt. But she looked at Dante, at the two men poised to betray him, and she saw not a monster, but the man whose life she had saved on a gurney. She saw the brother who mourned. She did not run. Instead, she took 2 steps to the side and shoved a towering, ridiculously expensive marble vase off its pedestal. It crashed to the floor with a sound like a thunderclap, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The distraction was all it took. The two men flinched, their eyes darting toward the sound for a split second. In that second, Dante moved. He was not a man anymore. He was a blur of violence, a symphony of brutal, economic motion. It was over before she could draw a full breath. The two men were on the floor, disarmed and gasping, and Dante stood over them, his expression unchanged. The alarm cut off as abruptly as it had begun. A test. It had all been a test. Dante looked at her, standing amidst the wreckage of the priceless vase. He saw that she had understood. He saw that she had had a choice, and he saw which one she had made. His storm-gray eyes held a new light, a dangerous one. "You should have run," he said, his voice a low growl. "You should have better security," she shot back, her chin lifted. A ghost of a smile, so faint it was barely there, touched his lips. He walked toward her, stopping so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He looked down at her, and the distance she had felt before was gone, replaced by something far more complicated, far more terrifying. "You are no longer a guest here, Ilera," he said, the sound of her name on his lips a physical touch. "You are a problem, and I am going to solve you." The days that followed were a lesson in tension. She lived in his space, under his protection, which felt more like a cage. She learned the rhythms of his life, the quiet meetings, the calls that ended in clipped, deadly orders. She learned that his silence was more dangerous than his anger, and that his control was absolute. The threat from the Falcone family was a constant, simmering pressure. They knew a nurse had saved him. They knew she had disappeared. They were hunting for her. Dante made it clear that her only safety was within his walls, with him. The key to finding the traitor who had set up Dante's ambush was Dr. Albright. The doctor was the weak link, the man who knew who had paid him to make Dante's medical records disappear. But Albright was terrified into silence. Dante had him brought to a warehouse, the air thick with the smell of dust and fear. Marco stood by, his expression grim, as Dante prepared to extract the information by any means necessary. Ilera watched from the doorway as Dante circled the weeping doctor. She saw the tools laid out on a nearby table. This was the reality of his world, the cold, brutal mechanics of power. She should have been horrified. Part of her was. But another part, the pragmatic, clear-eyed nurse who triaged life and death in the ER, saw only inefficiency. Violence was messy. Fear was cleaner. She stepped forward. "Let me," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Dante turned, one eyebrow raised. Marco looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "You will not get what you need from him with that," she said, nodding to the tools. "You will get what he thinks you want to hear. But I know men like him." She walked over to the trembling doctor, crouching down so she was at his eye level. She did not raise her voice. She did not threaten. She simply began to speak, her tone clinical, detached. "You have a wife, Patricia, and 2 adult sons, both in college," she began, her voice soft. "You have a pension.
A 401k.
A reputation. These are the things that matter to you," she paused. "Men like Mr. Moretti, they deal in pain. It is quick. It ends. But the people he works for, the people he answers to, They are more creative. They deal in ruin. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. They will not break your bones, doctor. They will break your life. An anonymous tip about Medicare fraud. A rumor about an affair with a resident. Your sons will find their tuition funds frozen in a federal investigation that will last for years. Your wife will be audited by the IRS until she has nothing left. You will not be hurt. You will simply be erased, piece by piece, until the only thing you have left is the memory of the moment you could have prevented it all. Albright stared at her, his face a mask of dawning horror. She had not laid a hand on him, but she had flayed him open. She had seen his fears and weaponized them with surgical precision. He broke. He sobbed out a name. A logistics manager at the hospital. A man on Silvio Falcone's payroll. Alleyways stood up and walked back to Dante, her heart pounding. She had crossed a line. She had used her knowledge, her empathy, not to heal, but to wound. She looked up at Dante, expecting to see disgust, or perhaps even anger. Instead, she saw a flicker of dark, possessive approval in his eyes. He had seen a part of her that mirrored a part of himself. That shared darkness bound them closer than any kindness could have. But it also made her a more valuable target. The Falcones made their move 2 days later. She was in a car with Marco, heading to what was supposed to be a secure location, when a black sedan slammed into them, forcing them off the road. The world became a storm of screeching tires and shattering glass. Men in masks descended on the car, their objective clear. They were not there to kill her. They were there to take her. Marco fought back, but they were outnumbered. A door was ripped open, and a hand grabbed her arm, yanking her out onto the pavement. For a split second, she thought it was over. Then, a second car, Dante's car, screeched onto the scene. He was out before it even stopped moving. The ensuing violence was terrifyingly fast. Dante moved through the chaos not with rage, but with a chilling, lethal grace. He was a force of nature, a blade in the dark. A shot rang out, aimed at her. Before she could even react, Dante was there, shoving her down behind the engine block of the wrecked car, his body a shield over hers. The bullet whizzed past, striking the metal where her head had been. She was pressed against him, the hard planes of his chest against her back, his arm a steel band around her. She could feel his heart hammering against her spine, smell the faint scent of cedar and gunpowder on his skin. In the middle of a gunfight, surrounded by death, she had never felt more alive. He had almost lost her. The thought was a physical blow, more real than any bullet. Back in the silent penthouse, the adrenaline drained away, leaving a humming, vibrating tension in its wake. The city lights seemed distant, cold. Dante stood by the window, his back to her, his shoulders rigid. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. "My brother trusted everyone," he said finally, his voice rough, directed at the glass. "He saw the good in people even when it wasn't there. It got him killed." He paused, his fist clenching at his side. "I trust no one. It is the only way to stay alive in this life." He turned his head just enough that she could see his profile, carved from stone in the moonlight. "But I find myself watching the door until you are back inside it. I find myself listening for your footsteps in the hall." He did not look at her. He could not. It was a confession of a vulnerability he despised, a weakness he could not afford. It was more intimate than a declaration of love. It was the truth. She walked toward him, her own footsteps silent on the marble floor. She stopped just behind him and, without thinking, placed her hand on his arm. His muscles were rigid beneath the fine wool of his suit. He did not pull away. For a moment, they just stood there, two solitary figures against the vast, unforgiving city. It was an admission, a surrender. But the information from Albright, combined with evidence from the attack, had revealed a deeper, more venomous truth. The logistics manager was a Falcone man, yes, but he could not have known Dante's transport route without help. The betrayal was not just outside the family. It was inside. The person who had sold out Leo was still in their circle. And now they had a new target. They knew Alara was not just a witness. She was his weakness. The traitor was Marco. The discovery was a quiet, sickening blow. Marco, who had been like a second brother to Dante and Leo. Jealousy, ambition, the poison of being second best, had curdled his loyalty into betrayal. He had given Leo to the Falcons. He had set up Dante's ambush. And he was not finished. Her medical instincts screamed that the story was wrong. The details ask you. But her survival instincts, honed by weeks in Dante's world, told her something else. This was the endgame. She agreed to go. Before she left, she walked to the heavy oak desk in Dante's study. Her fingers closed around a small, distinctive object she had seen him use 100 times. A silver fountain pen, its cap inlaid with a single sliver of onyx. It was his father's. A signal. She slipped it into her pocket. The warehouse smelled of brine and decay. Marco was there waiting for her. His mask of concern was gone, replaced by a sneer of triumph. "He should have given the family to me," Marco said, pacing before her. "After Leo, it should have been me. But he never saw me. He only ever saw his brother's ghost." Alara let him talk. She listened, her mind racing, cataloging her surroundings. Piles of crates, a rusty chain hoist, pools of greasy water on the concrete floor. She was not a soldier. She was a nurse. She knew the body. She knew its weaknesses. As Marco ranted, she let her eyes roll back in her head, a low moan escaping her lips. She allowed her body to go limp, then began to convulse, a classic grand mal seizure, expertly faked. It worked. Chaos erupted. Marco's men, hardened killers used to bullets and knives, were thrown by the sudden, visceral horror of a medical emergency they did not understand. They backed away, uncertain, shouting at Marco for instructions. That was the opening. The warehouse doors exploded inward. Dante and his most loyal men poured into the space, moving with practiced, lethal precision. The air filled with the deafening roar of gunfire. In the confusion, Alara, her seizure miraculously over, scrambled behind a stack of crates. One of Marco's men, distracted by the main assault, turned toward her. She grabbed a heavy, rusted pipe from the floor and swung it with all her might against the back of his knee. The man screamed and crumpled, his leg bending at an unnatural angle. She had not killed him. She had incapacitated him. She had saved one of Dante's men from being shot in the back. The fight was short and brutal. Dante cornered Marco at the far end of the warehouse. There was no final confrontation of words, only a cold, quiet finality. The betrayal was ended. Silence descended, thick and absolute, broken only by the sound of their breathing and the distant wail of sirens. Dante walked toward her, his face an unreadable mask. He did not ask if she was hurt. He did not fuss over her. He simply stopped in front of her, his eyes taking in the scene, her standing steady and unafraid, the makeshift weapon still clutched in her hand. His gaze went to the incapacitated man on the floor, then back to her. "Nero chose you the moment he saw you," he said, his voice low and rough. "My brother was always the better judge of character." He gently took the heavy pipe from her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. The touch was electric. He was right. It was not a proposal. It was not a promise of love. It was an acknowledgement, an acceptance. In his world, it was everything. She was no longer a problem to be solved. She was family. Weeks later, she stood on the balcony of a Brooklyn brownstone, the deed to which was in her name. It was a home, not a fortress, filled with light and books. The world she had known, the life of sterile hospital corridors and predictable shifts, was gone forever. She had crossed a line and could never go back. That was the price. Nero leaned his heavy body against her leg, a comforting, solid weight. She heard footsteps behind her and did not have to turn. She knew his presence. Dante came to stand beside her, not touching, but so close she could feel the warmth of his body against the cool night air. He held out a mug. Coffee, black, 2 sugars. He had remembered. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that was not about control or danger or loss. It was a quiet, settled certainty. In his world, loyalty was the most sacred vow. Remembering how she took her coffee was a promise. Staying was her answer. She took the mug from his hand, the warmth spreading through her fingers as she looked out at the glittering, dangerous city that was now her home.